Are
And
we
then
live?
go ahead.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending this year's 2025 Story Valley Writing Conference, specifically the sci-fi writing panel. I'd love to introduce all of our fine panelists here, but this is also my first time meeting some of you. So welcome everyone. Thanks, John and Huey and the lovely Ladybird. And who else do we have here? So I believe that's all of us here at the moment. Can you kindly introduce yourselves with a quick blurb? Can we start with John?
No, uh, I am basically a science fiction and horror writer. I published one vampire novel. It did very well. I'm a retired English teacher, and I loved reading and writing, and I thought this was just a fun way to talk to people about sci-fi.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. And if you don't mind linking your little vampire novel to us at some point, I'm
Oh,
sure some of us would love to pick it up.
okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
All right. Thank you, John. Um, Ladybird, whose real name escapes me at the moment, I'm afraid. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Sarah, for those of you who need to know. But I go by SG George professionally. I am the acquisitions editor for a small publishing company out of Houston, Texas that specializes in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. We suck at fiction, as well as doing freelance line copy and dev editing for all of those same genres. I teach writing classes here at the local library. I'm on the board of directors for my Writers Guild, but those are all really distractions from getting actually to edit novels.
Fantastic. And wow, everyone here seems to be a lot more professionally of a writer than myself, which is fantastic. At least you guys have the wealth of knowledge to talk about the topic today. Okay, and Huey, can you kindly introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, everyone. I am Audrey Huey. I write thrillers and horror under the name AK Huey. And let me see. Okay, so I have a bachelor's in English with a concentration in writing, and my master's is in ancient and classical history. So this is something I bring into everything that I do. I look for that historical accuracy, that realism, and then I twist it into something horrifying. And I also dabble in sci-fi. That is something that I want to pick up in the future. But currently I have contracts, so those first. So, but I do think that, or I was ready to jump on this panel when Amber asked me. So I am very excited to be here and share any knowledge I can with you.
Thanks so much. And I'm sure that you'll have a lot of knowledge to share. Really, all of you, thank you again for being here today. And I guess to start us off, I wanted to ask maybe a bit of a more broad question in terms of science fiction itself. Can I ask the three of you, you are writing science fiction in some capacity. What was it that inspired you guys to write science fiction over other genres? John, do you have something to say? Because you did mention you wrote a vampire novel.
Oh,
I think some people might not immediately associate vampires with sci-fi, but maybe have a little twist there that made it sci-fi.
I was in a writing program for an MA in creative writing, and I pitched 3 novels. I pitched a mainstream idea, I pitched a sci-fi idea, and I pitched a horror idea. They liked both the sci-fi and the horror, and it got me thinking about, well, how could I combine the two? And with vampires change shape, they dissolve into mist, they become bats, all this. And if you look at physics, that's not possible. So I started thinking, well, how could they do this? And it led me to an idea of like empathy and telepathy and mind manipulation. And I went pretty deep into the sci-fi aspects of that. And my vampires, they make you think they're vampires, but they manipulate They manipulate your mind. They manipulate the way you perceive things. And I like the sci-fi aspect of that. The writing program liked the horror and the sci-fi aspects. So I wrote the novel, got my degree, everything was great. And then some of the professors talked to publishing houses, and one of the publishing houses contacted me, and that's how it got published. But my first love is sci-fi, and I just wanted to explain, well, how can vampires do this? And I think it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, no, for sure. That is quite interesting because in that sense, they're really not like the traditional vampires. They rather
Right.
manipulate their victims' perceptions of them, which is really great. I think there's a really nice theme. Maybe you did explore it in the book there about, the parallel realities and how, differences in perception. Does objective reality exist? That kind of thing. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sarah, what do you have to say about what influenced you to get into sci-fi?
Well, I have always read pretty much anything I can get my hands on, but I started working in science fiction out of convenience. I was in my high school writing class, and one of the other kids in the high school writing class happened to be writing a science fiction novel, and I had more fun telling Thomas Huntington that he was wrong than actually writing a single word. And this is why I'm an editor now. And so I just started working on science fiction organically that way. And I went from his sort of it's a military sci-fi, big guys in big suits of armor with big guns and big aliens. And then I went from working on his science fiction to anti-capitalist space mermaids. And so that was also a lot of fun. And I've just kept
capitalist space mermaids.
Anti-capitalist lesbian space mermaids. I always forget at least one of the adjectives. And so that was also a lot of fun. And then Kelly Lynn Colby with Curse Dragon Ship Publishing, which was a speculative fiction, reached out through those sorts of channels and was like, "You want to do some more?" And I said, "Yeah." I think that there is a real chance that I went down the memoir route if I started working with old people instead of 18-year-olds. But thank the Lord, I did not do that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So it sounds like your influences were, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it sounds like they were a bit more political in that sense, in terms of maybe what it was that sort of attracted you to science fiction. Is that right?
Not necessarily. And you can, with any story, you can tell a political sci-fi thriller or sci-fi anything. But I was not particularly interested in the sci-fi, I was interested in the sci-fi. I wasn't particularly interested in the political element, so far as making a statement. Like, it's cool to have LGBT representation in a story, but I don't write LGBTQ stories where the point is to write LGBTQ characters and the story works around that. I like, and I work with and encourage people to write stories that happen to have these characters who are just living their lives just like anybody else, and they happen to have one of these letters attached to them. And it's the same thing for any other political leaning. I like sci-fi because of the alternate explanations, like, how do vampires do their thing? Well, let's figure it out.
Okay, thank you. Lovely. And Audrey, what do you have to say about what got you into sci-fi and maybe how it influences the way you're writing now?
So I read everything. I read a lot of sci-fi as a kid, and I love sci-fi shows. I never felt equipped to write it until I did an NYC at Midnight writing challenge where I got the genre of sci-fi, and I'd always felt a little intimidated by that but I ended up loving it because I have 14 years in the Army, and that's being basically writing a military sci-fi after being in there. It felt almost a little bit like coming home. So I do have a trilogy that I have in progress once I have other commitments fulfilled. But I enjoyed it. It was so much fun. I wrote so quickly, and I just had a blast doing it. And I think my favorite subscription is Popular Mechanics and Popular Science. So I like to take little elements of that and say, this is really interesting. How does this fit into, the advancement of weaponry and warfare and, and especially on an interplanetary level, like what would that look like light years ahead? Or how can we keep it a touch advanced while still super relatable to the modern reader? So to me, it's just an absolute riot to think of these different problems and how to make things relatable, how to make them accurate. And for example, I sat with a periodic table and through, not in a day, but through the course of time, I thought, okay, how do I make up another element? What other elements are being discovered, being added to? And so how could we progress this? What would we discover on other planets? So that for me, that was my introduction, and I just took to it because
you just ran with
it and great interest.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And it's really great, I think, when for all authors in general, not just sci-fi, but when you can pull from some lived experience and it informs how you write and inspires how you write, which I think is actually a great segue into the next question I have for the three of you, which is actually about how you actually weave, the science fiction elements into your writing, the technical stuff, like, in your case, for example, Audrey, it's like, how does that look like when we have new elements, and what does space combat look like? Are you approaching it with the classical, physics depiction where things are being lobbed at each other from millions of kilometers away, or is it more Star Warsy where it's like ships are getting right up next to each other? So how do you three balance the scientific aspect of sci-fi with obviously the story crafting craft, creating compelling characters, good arcs, an interesting world? How do you approach that? How do you balance the scientific and technical information with still creating a good story? Let's start with perhaps yourself, John.
I would say I always go with the story first. So a lot of my stuff is character driven. I'm working on a time travel story, and they're just notoriously slippery. And the reason I'm doing it is because my character has aged, and he has a profession in the future where he basically goes like into a virtual world, and he's one of 4 people on the planet who can go into fusion reactors and balance the fusion. So a quarter of the planet relies on him to provide power in the future. The time travel aspect comes in because he has aged and he's losing his ability to do this. And he knows that they're going to replace him. There's nothing else that he wants to do. So I always start with the characters, and then I'm like, well, what aspects of sci-fi do I need? I had to learn about fusion generators and tokamak generators. I had to learn a lot of stuff about time travel. And then the reason he has to time travel is his personal reason is he doesn't want to stop doing what he's doing. But he finds out later that a larger group is sending him on a mission. And the mission is to go back to 1912, and he's supposed to find a postcard that has an answer to a medical question. And the future is desperate. They've found parts of this postcard So it's sort of a sci-fi historical piece, but the sci-fi is in the background. The character has to get what he wants, and then you always want to make it a larger. The stakes have to be larger. So I always start with the character's personal stakes. What stakes are larger for society or the world, and then what science or science fiction do I need in the background? So that's how I weave things together.
Right. So it seems like from the way you approach it, the science is just a vessel or a tool to facilitate the story. The story doesn't revolve around the science. It's the other way around.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, because I think it's definitely good to remember that for any author, if you are hoping to get published as well, you do ultimately want to tell a story that your audience will like. And all of the elements are just in service of that. The ultimate goal is to make the good story. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Huey, since you were talking just moments ago about the very technical details about, the way the science in your world works, how do you balance the very technical details with creating a good story?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I had to decide was whether or not I wanted to do hard sci-fi. And I don't. I'm a thriller writer, so I want to keep, I have a natural instinct to keep that pace at a good clip because that keeps the reader reading. So I want to write something fun. We've got elements. I want people to not be able or my readers to not be able to distinguish what is, really scientifically possible or from what I'm creating. So blending that line, just like we would in history or historical writing, blending the line between fact and the fiction that we're creating. So I blend it like that. I know that I don't write super hard sci-fi, but that's because I like to keep the pace going very quickly and keep the reader turning the pages.
Right, yep. And I think you bring up an interesting point about hard sci-fi versus soft sci-fi. Myself, I do tend to write, when I started writing, I thought to myself, okay, the best way I'm going to describe it is it's going to be a blend of Star Wars with, if you know it, Warhammer 40K, etc., mixed with a little bit of Dune. Now, of these three, Dune is probably the most quote-unquote scientifically accurate. But even then, it has giant sandworms and future viewing shenanigans and all of that, which now brings me to you, Sarah, in terms of the way that you approach things, because it sounded like from your intro earlier, you definitely want to focus on making the story the important bit first, and then, like John, the science just serves as a vessel or a tool to facilitate that. But how do you weave these two elements together?
I see science as if a scientific concept is like Chekhov's gun. Like if you explain something to me like in great detail, I expect that to be important at the end of the book. Like time travel. If you take a time at the beginning of the book to tell me how time travel works, I expect the time travel to be important at the end of the book. And so there can be all these other sort of science fiction concepts that happen in the background, where we don't explain how two moons orbit the same planet in separate rotating directions. It doesn't matter because it's never going to come up. But it is important to explain, how the main character does his time travel, at least a little bit. If he's got a time machine or if he just blinks between dimensions, whatever. That sort of thing is important to the plot. And so if we're going to, or so that can get explained. But if it's just like random world building detail, number 743, we created a new element, here's exactly how we did it. We don't need to know that unless that is important. And so that's my metric is if your info dump is important to the plot, you can keep it. If it's not, I'm going to cut it.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. And actually, what you mentioned, some of the things that are like, world building element number 300 something or whatever. This actually does bring me to my next question, which is generally about world building. So, I've had it described to me, and you may have had it described differently to yourselves growing up, that the reason people write and read science fiction is because it describes to us another potentially viable world or an offshoot of our own, or it asks a question that makes us consider the way our current society is established. And so this comes to world building. When you guys wrote or will write your stories, does the world itself factor in greatly into that? Like, do you focus on world buildings in order to create the stage that the story will take place in? You know, Tolkien, I think, is a very famous example of a well-established world that just so happens to have a great story in it. Do you guys make creating the world building, a large focus in your work, or is it mostly just in the background? You hear bits about it through the characters' stories, but it's not the main focus.
I write short fiction. Like, if we're talking about what I write personally, I write short fiction.
Right.
So there's not a lot of like hard world building. I will throw in details here and there about, you know, something or another, but it's one sentence and it's there and then it's gone. And if you miss it, it's not a problem. And so we were talking about hard sci-fi versus soft sci-fi. I write vibe sci-fi, where
vibe sci-fi, interesting.
If I'm the one detail sounds like pretty cool, but it's not super important, so we're just gonna put it on there and vibe and go on, because they don't matter. But for books that I'm editing, it depends on the genre. If we're doing a sci-fi thriller, it's not super important to explain all of the background things, but sci-fi, what's that one where all of the people come together and they have a big battle? Sci-fi, not saga sci-fi.
Military sci-fi.
There's a genre above military sci-fi where it's more civilization level. I'm sorry, it's 6 a.m.
Okay.
I've had 2 hours of sleep.
That's fine. Oh, okay.
And civilization level sci-fi sagas, you know, where those crunchy world building details are more important, and not just the science of it, but also like the politics of them are sort of go in the same category of, is this world building important to the plot? And the further that you get in word count expectation for the genre, the less tenuous, or the less you have to actually attach it to the plot, the more tenuous that connection can be.
Okay, great, thank you. And Audrey, what do you have to say about how you build the world? Because from the three of you, it sounded like you had the most, having been in the military, perhaps the most extensive knowledge about probably how things like logistics work, how tactics and strategy factor into these stories. Do you focus a lot on creating the world in your fiction, or do you just let it be another player in the story rather than almost a character unto its own?
I like setting in any story to be its own character, essentially. But I do like, sorry, the kittens are playing with the toys. So I really like to write exploratory fiction, military sci-fi. So where they're going to new planets, they're looking for resources and encountering awful things that they probably would be better off not encountering. And I really like writing tip of the spear. So I like writing those people that are right up there. And so the world has to factor, because you're exploring this new place and how it affects you and how it affects your people, how it affects your equipment, with different atmospheres and different life forms and different conditions. So I do take all of those, but I think those can all be thrilling elements of a good military sci-fi. They add to the struggle, they add to the mystery, they add to how, any challenge that they're facing, and makes the story more exciting.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And now I want to take this moment actually, because I've noticed, seems like the three of you have sort of varying levels of um, sort of adherence to what in our real world would constitute science. Like you have vampires that influence people's perceptions to make them seem like terrifying creatures. You have all of these things. I guess what I want to ask at this point to the three of you is, in terms of the science of it and the actual involvement of science in your works, where do you guys draw the line for what constitutes science that you're willing to include versus something that will pretty much alter the genre of your writing straight up from, let's say, soft science fiction straight up into science fantasy? Do you have a line there? Where do you decide, okay, I'm writing science fiction versus I'm writing fantasy now?
John?
Oh, I think there's a line. When you get to that line, whether you're leaping out into the speculation. Right now, I'm reading and listening to Project Hail Mary, and Andy Weir.
Oh, but by Andy Weir, yeah.
His everything is a scientific detail, and what I liked, I'm like, I can't understand this, but what I liked was his main character is a 5th grade middle school science teacher, and he will, if he hits a scientific fact that people might not understand, he explains it like you would explain it to a 4th or 5th grader, and I like that. But he works his way up from like middle school science all the way up to interstellar travel and how they achieve it. And I won't spoil the story, but he crosses the line and creates a way for interstellar travel, but he makes it believable. And when I'm writing, if I get to that line, I can tell I'm pushing the limits, and if I have to cross the line, I want to make sure there's enough science behind it, or reasoning, so that people believe it. But if you're writing science fiction, it is fiction. You have to cross that line, and you have to take that chance. So that's what I do. I approach it with the science, and then I'm like, time travel. Every day I'm reading new articles on, I don't know, quantum interlinked particles and all this stuff. And again, like Audrey was saying, popular science is amazing. And you read the articles, and every day, the science is getting closer to the science fiction.
Oh yeah.
So that's how I do things.
Yeah, for sure. There are a lot of things that we enjoy today, like satellites that started off in science fiction. And so I think, let's say 100 years from now, really the line that we see today between fantasy and reality is going to be radically different. But yeah, Sarah, how do you sort of weave that science into your story, but in a way where it's still considered science versus outright being fantasy?
Science fiction is magic, except we explain it using metal. Instead,
yeah.
And because you can do the same thing, like, I am a wizard. I need to get from point A to point B. So I'm going to make myself disappear here and appear over there using magic. But the moment we have our guys step into a metal box and they teleport from over there to over here in a metal box, now it's sci-fi, right? There's levels to that, right? That's very soft sci-fi. And the further that we get to more scientific accuracy, we get to hard sci-fi. But at the very basic level, like, the difference between science fiction and fantasy is the framing device for the magic.
Right. Okay. And in terms of that line where you have it's science fiction now versus fantasy again. For you, Audrey, what's the line for you? How does that work?
So for me, this is going to sound weird, but it's marketing.
Oh,
Because
yeah,
I want to
fair enough.
sell books. I want to make readers happy. I want reviews that said, "Oh my God, this blew me away." So any book I'm writing, like my current contract is thrillers, and I have to, walk a line even between real police procedure and what works for this fiction story, in a believable way. So one of those things that I do the same thing with science. What do I like to read? What do I like to write? That intersection is where I'm going to market. And so I want that story to fit that market so well that I could imagine it at, those top 10 in that category or categories, on Amazon. I want to be able to say that I wrote, and not in a superficial way, but in a way that I'm really thinking about the reader. They're going to look at my cover and know what they're going to get, and I'm going to fulfill basically the requirements of making readers of that genre happy. So that's where I draw the line. If I start info dumping, then I'm like, okay, is this really important? You know what I mean? Is this, or do readers of this genre or subgenre or category, do they want fun, fast, terrifying stuff? Do they want Pandorum, or do they want Project Hail Mary, which is amazing? Andy Weir's brilliant, but not everybody wants that.
Right.
So I want to know,
Definitely.
am I writing the thing that not only do I enjoy writing, but that I'm writing it in a way that the readers of that subgenre are going to just go bonkers over it?
Yeah, it's a very real consideration. I think most authors, even if they say, "Oh, I'm only writing for myself" and such, I think most authors would definitely enjoy having an audience, especially an audience that's willing to pay you for your work. So the market, as it were, is definitely a real consideration to make. And I think you're right in the sense that how scientifically accurate or how much science is in this is going to depend on what the market wants. If you're writing for mostly commercial purposes, in any case. Which actually leads me into my next question. In terms of the tools that you use to craft your next story, in this case, for example, considerations of the market, what does the market want? That's some really important information to consider when writing your next story. But what other tools do you guys make? Obviously, you'll probably make use of research. You might also make use of your own personal lived experience, and then the considerations of the market. But what other tools do you have in your mind, in your back pocket, that you then pull out when creating your work? Sarah, do you have anything that you'd want to say in this regard?
I use a lot of things that I've watched on YouTube before that kind of stuck in my head. Like one of the stories I wrote was a little vignette about a guy in a crashing spaceship, and the glass in his spaceship broke into little cubes like Pyrex, because I had watched a video of Anne something, I can't remember her name. She's a cooking YouTuber who put Pyrex in cold water to see if it would break. And that sort of stuck with me on the interesting difference between the cubes of glass. And so when I needed a story, like that sort of popped up. But Google, when I'm editing, like I said, I do vibe check sci-fi. So if something pops up in a story, I will Google it. And like one of the things that I Googled was, does sound waves travel faster than radio waves? Because I didn't believe that. And so I vibe checked it, and it was true.
Okay.
Obviously you can't Google, are shape-shifting aliens real? Well, you could, and you'd get the wrong answer. But
yeah, I think with AI these days, it's probably going to give you an AI summary there. Oh, contrary to popular belief, shape-shifting aliens do not exist, only in fiction or something.
So when I'm working on a book, I will check things that seem wildly out of character for the world, or counter to what I have personally experienced. Actually, one of the big ones that is actually technically relevant to what I have worked on in the past. And what happened in the story was a person needed to send secure messages from one server to another with the AI that is their spy machine in the middle of it, reading everything that runs through the network. And I was like, I don't think that she could do this. I don't think that we could, with as you've got NASA, which is in our real world. You've got these robots that are very much in our real world. I don't know enough about computer data security to say that this will actually work, but it doesn't make sense. And so then we talked to an expert. We actually talked to a sci-fi, or not, he's not a sci-fi data, he's an actual data analysis. And he was able to give some advice on how to actually get the messages from one server to another without the evil AI reading it.
Right. Yeah, fantastic. I think whenever an author, when possible, has access to the resource that is an actual professional working in the field that you're writing science fiction about, it's definitely good to check some things with them, because it's going to make the story more grounded and believable, but also can allow you to get away with more shenanigans as a result. John, what tools do you pull out of your magic hat that you use when you write your stories?
I'm a firm believer in balancing the content, the craft of writing, and using models. Like, if you want to write a book, you find books that are similar or stories, and you read as much as you can. I have books everywhere in my house, and I'm old school, so I go back to.
We can see that. Yeah, you have a lot of books right now.
And I love reading. Newspaper articles. I still read paper newspapers. I get the New York Times in paper form. I'll find articles like on a Sunday or in the science sections, and I'll save those. And if they age out, if the idea doesn't come to anything, then I just throw them out. But magazines like Popular Science, I do a lot of the paper research. Like I said, reading stories like what I want to create, and then reading the background information. I also use a lot more of the online technology with Google. I live in a rural area, and I'm envious of everyone else who's much better at technology than I am. But I go on a Google search, and there are a lot of scientific journals that you can go into and research. Academically, there are databases. If you go to certain libraries, as an English teacher, I used to use JSTOR and a bunch of other storage platforms. But I try to balance it, and it's just my preference. I'm old school with paper and all that, and I know there's going to come a day when that's going to stop. It's just trending that way. But that's what I like. I hope I'm wrong, but I try to, if I have a question about plotting, or if I have a question about something technical, I'll go to a resource like, I don't know, I'm a big fan of John Gardner in his, like, on moral fiction. One of my favorite things is, when you write a story, it should improve you as an author and improve your readers. They don't have to like it. They don't have to agree with it, but it should make them think or improve them. So I'll go back to books or sources like that.
Right. Okay. And I think one of the very goals of speculative fiction, of which science fiction is a category, is definitely to make people reconsider the world, as it were, and whether that's by imagining a variant of the world or an entirely fictionalized version of it, think about the human condition and ways that it can be improved, which is great. Now, Audrey, are you still with us? Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
I'd like to extend the same question to you. Now, you sort of answered this in your previous answer, where you obviously make use of market considerations to determine what you write and how you write it. But besides that, or perhaps within that main consideration, what other tools and resources do you use to help you decide what you're going to write and how you're going to write it?
Yeah. So one thing we already talked about was experience, and my experience in defense lends well to, writing military sci-fi, for example. But also, I like what John said. I will go to Wonder Books and I'll get old. They have. I'm right about with Sarah with how much sleep I've gotten. So, but I get these old, not a period. It's like not quite an anthology, but maybe it is an anthology. But it's got all the old greats would get together and write these short sci-fi stories and put them in a little collection for that year. So I like getting these used copies and reading from the greats back, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and saying, okay, well, what was the award-winning stuff, or what was the top-notch stuff as we progress through the decades. And so that's what I read. I like reading. I love reading popular science and popular mechanics in my hands. I like that feel. Sometimes I will read it on my phone if I'm in a hurry or if I'm at the doctor or something like that. But I really do take a lot of reading and reading the greats and trying to absorb some of their brilliance. But also, I think some of the tools I use is just kind of keeping a running notebook again, on paper, actually, of things that are relevant to that story, or that I might be able to bring into that story. And then, even though that's a longer process of research and thinking, I think when we put a lot of thought into something, especially in the sci-fi genre, if we want to do it really well, we can make something that's not just, oh, you're going to love this quick, fun thing, but also you're going to be highlighting some lines, okay, and on your Kindle, or you're going to be making notes on the margin, or it's going to even spark you to do a Google search and see, what is this, like a real thing or close to a real thing? That's my goal, is to make a really good story that people fall in love with. And we don't read military sci-fi just for
shooty, bang, bang.
Yeah, exactly. It can, speak to, the everlasting human condition in ways we hadn't thought of before, which is to explore, to exploit, and our, constant war against our own nature. So, yeah, I think there's a lot that we can do, and using tools like, just as simple as a notebook to keep, a running log of your thoughts for that specific story, and just kind of, sorry, kittens.
That's okay.
Kittens again. They play rough. So, but yeah, so, just keeping that running log, reading a ton, using what lived experience you can, or at least finding the good resources, good models for the characters. You don't have to have joined the military, obviously, to write military sci-fi, but you got to have a good source. You got to have some good models to look at, and really know, again, get clear genre and subgenre. So for me, I look into movies a lot as well, and I really love something like Pandorum. Pandorum was brilliant and speaks to human evolution, So there's so many different tools and ways to do it, but make sure you have a way to keep all of your running thoughts organized, so that you can be like, oh yeah, what was that thing I thought I was going to do with this story, and you have no idea. So
that's right. Yeah, I do think that, and I'm guilty of this, which is why I started doing the opposite. I used to very much just write my story as I went, no notes, whatever came to my head, I tried to fit it in. It was fun, but then I realized I could probably write and plot this beforehand, like create the arcs and all of that, write the major points, which I'm doing now, which is great. Okay, I'm going to ask one last question here before I open it up to questions from the audience. And that is about the ethics of, in particular, at least your science fiction and the impact that you guys hope to have with your work. Now, science fiction and speculative fiction really has always dealt with some variant of the question of what if the world were like this, you know? And in your work, you probably have some kind of answer to that. You know, if the world had vampires that could transform and you know, shape people's perceptions, this is how the world would be like, and is that a good thing or a bad thing, etc. So, in terms of the impact that you guys hope to have with your work on the readers and perhaps on society in general, is there anything you'd like to share about the scope of the impact you'd like to have and what sorts of ethical perhaps issues or considerations of the day that you talk about, whether that be AI or climate change or, you know, intellectual divides and things like that? John, do you have anything you'd like to say about this?
When I'm writing, I always think about writers that I admire, and the conflict that comes to mind frequently is you're either a dark future sci-fi writer or you're an optimistic. And people like Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry was optimistic about the future. We're all going to get over our differences. We're going to work together. Nations won't matter. Money won't be a driving force. And I like that. I think it's too optimistic, but I like it. In my writing, it's usually the main character who's the optimist. They're the ones who are fighting for the good. They want things right. And society, there's some element of society or some element of authority that's pushing in the opposite direction. And in the time travel story I'm writing, this person finds out even if you escape to the past, those forces are still there. You know, you can go anywhere. Like the old saying, "We have met the enemy, and he is us." Okay, that you take the problems with you. And in my ethics in my writing, I always try to give the main character the optimism and the thing that I would fight for, and then sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. In my time travel story, without giving things away, my character wins his personal battle. He gets what he wants personally, and he keeps it like his character and his optimism and his ethics, but he doesn't win all the battles against the larger forces. So
right.
So the ethics, I try to keep ethics like personal, and then and I think that's how everybody functions every day. My last comment is AI. I'm seeing all this stuff with AI, and I finally, like, you hear a lot of bad things. I was on television here. Donny Osmond is on tour, and I haven't thought of Donny Osmond, I don't know, since 1974 or something. And he's on tour, and he's using AI to create a 14-year-old version of himself. And in his show, he sings with this AI version on screen. And he was talking about he liked that. It's a positive thing that he's doing. So I try to keep it in perspective. Again, there's a personal use of the technology for what he's doing. I try to keep it that way. And I don't know, that's the way I enjoy writing.
Right. Okay. Thank you, John. Sarah, do you have anything that you'd like to add to anything that John said, or your own topics that you'd like to bring up?
Personally, when I write both science fiction and fantasy, because I do a lot of just straight up fantasy, is this idea of what makes someone a monster in fantasy, but you change it to what makes us human in sci-fi, where you face the alien, the other from somewhere else that seems to mirror your reactions, your feelings, but also the man-made horrors, the AI that smiles and cries out in fear and those sorts of things. Like, I like exploring where is the line between humanity and what humanity creates, right? And it's a really hot button topic right now because of the question of AI generative content, AI generated images, AI generated text, those sorts of things. And can it be copyrighted? And the Copyright Office says no, because it wasn't created by a person. And so then at what point will personhood change? That's sort of like what I like to explore in sci-fi. If you die but your consciousness is uploaded, are you still human? That sort of thing. That's what I like to explore, and what I like to prompt the reader to think about is, how human are you actually?
And I guess a subset of that question is, what even does it mean to be human, right?
Right.
Sort of fantastic. And lastly, Audrey, do you have anything to say about the impact you'd like your work to have in terms of, ethics or the human condition and some such?
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I've kind of already hinted, thinking about, we as humans and our nature, and sometimes fighting our nature and trying to reach, well, we'll just use it for ease, but enlightenment, so to speak. So I like to think about the questions of, like John said, personal ethics, and I like to have characters who are willing to go against the grain and in order to, maintain integrity and stand up for what they believe in, what they know is right, versus what is wrong. But I also like to think in sci-fi about the impact of, the way we treat renewable resources and the way we exploit natural resources, and in the way that everything we touch and use and every resource that is used up affects some life. So how long is it into space exploration, or even the exploration of our oceans, before that's definitely sci-fi right there. But, how long before we come across a life form that is unwilling, that is absolutely capable and unwilling to let us use their resources that affect their life? So that is essentially my what if is, eventually, when do we come across this life form that says, no, you're not going to take this thing that affects my life or kills my species.
Right.
So, we thinking about sustainability in not just a kitschy catchphrase way, but really how to live. It sounds so hippie-ish, but maybe that's not a bad thing. I don't know. But how to really live in better harmony with the world around us, like, like ancient peoples did. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really great topic to bring up, because actually you might have seen this photo. I don't know how old the photo is, but you might have seen this photo or video. Actually, there was a logging company, and one of their machines was, doing its thing, cutting down trees. And the video was of like an orangutan, I think, that like took a stick and started whacking the machine. I know that video has been in circulation for at least a few years now, but when you brought up your point about when we encounter another life form that's unwilling to let us use their resources, what will that look like? And I'm afraid the answer is we already have. And the way it looks like is we decide to exterminate them.
And
which
then
is unfortunate.
Until we come across something that's willing to exterminate us.
And capable of it, yes. Now that's definitely in the realm of aliens, because alas, it seems like there's no other life form on this planet besides maybe bacterial.
Until sharks grow legs.
Until sharks grow legs.
Polar bears.
Or polar bears. Those guys are vicious.
Yeah.
And sustainability is actually a topic that's near and dear to my heart as well, because it's woven into my work in some way or another. Okay, well, thank you all for answering these questions, and I hope that the audience was able to get something that they'll be able to apply in their own work or just in their own experiences from you guys. I'd like to open it up now to anyone to ask some questions. We have time for a few. Did anyone have any questions? You can type them down if you don't want to sort of speak on voice. So yeah, please feel free to write it down, and if you do, we'll have a look at it. Let's see here. So I'm not seeing any questions just yet, so maybe they're typing. But actually, I'd like to ask you guys a question. In terms of, oh wait, oh yeah, that's right. So in terms of the work that you guys do in your everyday, obviously John's an actual published author. You, as well as Audrey and yourself, Sarah, are a editor and writer as well. In the course of your everyday work, and I ask this because I'm super curious and maybe hope that I'm not doing it, is there a mistake that you guys often see, or maybe it's not a mistake, but something that strikes you as wrong, whether you're reading a science fiction story or you're writing it, you realize, oh, that shouldn't be the case. Maybe it's just a matter of the author decided to fill an entire 10 pages with nothing but world building without advancing the plot or something. What's a thing that you guys have seen that you'd probably prefer not to appear as often in sci-fi works?
One of the things that I saw recently, aside from info dumping, you guys all know not to info dump. What really bothered me recently was I watched the new Superman movie, and Superman is the sci-fi, just in case we need to clarify that. And we had a Earth computer talk to an alien computer. You can't get JavaScript to talk to C++. There is no way that we are getting a human computer to talk to an alien computer the first time that the two interact. And so I think that if human technology interacts with alien technology, I don't think that it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work plug and play. I don't think that it's going to work without a whole lot of work. And so in your sci-fi, if they stumble across an alien planet and they stumble across an alien ship and they're just going to salvage something off the alien ship, if it's not metal paneling, it's not going on your ship.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's completely fair, because I think this is definitely more in the realm of soft sci-fi, like let's say Mass Effect. Oh, translators are the answer to everything. Oh, you put on this device and suddenly you can understand an alien language, right? Okay, great, because that I do think that's one thing where, I'm sorry, the whole point of them being aliens is because they're really different from us. And if you want to be able to bridge that gap and be able to communicate, that should be a monumental undertaking that is like the culmination of a story onto its own. You don't just hand wave it away. Oh, we plugged a few wires and we managed to translate it. Definitely. Okay, John, was there anything in your experience as a published author that you think, and avid reader, that you think perhaps people should not be doing, if not at all, then at least as much?
I would agree with Sarah. It bothers me. The computer thing bothers me a lot, and they do it in Independence Day too, and other.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Like, we're just going to upload a virus to the alien computer. It's like, and they lose me. The other thing is, one little fact can destroy an entire thing for me. And I just saw they're coming out with Time Cop on the screen, and there's like commentary. They've all these ads, like you can go see a screening of Time Cop, and I think they're making fun of things in it. And it's almost like a Mystery Science Theater kind of situation. But in Time Cop, there's a scene where they talk about finding gold. They find gold in the future, and they want to prove that it's from the Civil War era. Someone went back and stole it, and they talk about carbon testing the gold, and I'm like, that doesn't work, and that just, it blew the whole thing for me. So one little scientific fact that's totally wrong, it can be slightly wrong, and I can sort of get through it. But when facts are totally wrong, like the computer situation, you can't carbon test certain things, and it just blows it for me. So I would hope people don't do that as often.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of us here deciding to write science fiction as opposed to just straight up fantasy is because I'm guessing we still want an element of the real world
Yeah.
in this work. The premise is that it's still mostly the same. Perhaps there's just one or a few elements changed. But yeah, if you straight up falsify something or do something that's straight up wrong, but you pass it off as correct, that would probably lose me as well. Sarah, how about yourself?
I have already answered.
Yeah.
Oh,
Audrey.
sorry. My brain is starting to malfunction because I didn't have that much sleep either. Audrey.
Yeah, so I think I'm a published author as well, and that is my primary job aside from, well, I mean, my primary job is being a mom, but just writing is my thing, my full-time thing. So for me, same thing Sarah and John said, but as well for me specifically, I think it's the terrible portrayals of military, just from leadership, levels of leadership, rank, and behavior and mannerisms is just absolutely atrocious most of the time. And so that's why I think
Sorry, when you say terrible portrayal, you don't necessarily mean that military personnel are depicted as, say, the villains.
No, I just mean it's like so uninformed. Like they didn't do any research.
Yeah.
I mean, you can basically go anywhere and find a veteran of the global war on terrorism and somebody who's deployed Iraq, Afghanistan, anything, or even just been in the last 20 years, and they know, about what it's like, the culture, and everything you're supposed to do, every military etiquette. And it just irks me that people don't try to do a little bit of research, or try to just watch Black Hawk Down, for heaven's sake. That is fantastic because they actually had the guys who were there consult on the film. And I think that's why I liked Star Trek Voyager so much, because I was still in the military when I watched Star Trek Voyager, and they got so much more of the nuance of what it's like in, a military unit, correct, even though that's the Navy. But they still got the struggles of leadership, Captain Janeway's struggles of being a leader, having feelings for someone, but you can't do that because that's, you're a leader. You get to be alone in leadership. And yeah, I think it was like after season 3, it got really good, or whenever it was that they brought in 7 of 9. It got so much more fantastic, down to the finest details of what the characters were saying and how they were interacting with each other. And so if you're going to write a culture, write military sci-fi, find someone that you can ask about the culture, ask what it's like to be in the military, ask what were those struggles, and like the things that you wanted to do in the military but you couldn't, or wanted to do in social situations but you couldn't. Fraternizing, this is a huge issue. You don't, if you're enlisted, you do not go hang out with officers. Things like that. That's a small but very important detail. So I think that's the biggest thing that irks me.
Yeah, when people don't do their research about the particular topic. I mean, you would hope they do research if they're including it in the story, because it is sci-fi.
Some people just like the bang bang and the like tough manly attitude, or manly, but then they take all of this basically story gold and they just leave it on the side by not doing that cultural research, essentially military culture.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Now, I do have 2 more questions from the audience here. Thanks, Charlene. I guess if we have time, we'll go for one of them here. Maybe not both, unfortunately. So I think I'll choose the first question here that Charlene asked. She asked, what makes science fiction so powerful for reflecting on real-world issues while still entertaining us readers? What do you guys have to say about that? Sarah, do you have any input?
I actually was thinking about my answer to the second question, because I think
Okay. I mean, the 2 questions are somewhat connected, I think.
Yeah.
Because LGBTQ representation is a big issue right now?
When I am editing or writing anything that has LGBT representation, unless it is an LGBT novel written for an LGBT publisher with the express intent of pushing, and I do not mean this in a bad way, pushing the LGBT agenda, right? When they just are there in the story, I want them to be there in the story and as seamless as any of the other world building details where it's normal, right? Like that's what we want readers to come away with when we look at those sorts of things is we want them to be just another part of the world because that's what it should be in our world, right? And so if we want to explore themes of self-identity or the hardships that come with discrimination from that sort of thing, then it's different. But just in speculative fiction, if there's just somebody who is gay and also on a spaceship, we just want them to be gay on a spaceship.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I think Star Trek, will probably have popularized the concept of, a gender blind society quite a bit where I don't care if you're black or a woman or trans or what have you. If you're qualified for the position, you're qualified for the position. And then you just have to go through the same process as everyone else. It is. Well, hopefully we might be able to achieve such a future soon. Obviously, we still have a bit of work to do there, but I think it's still achievable. Okay, Audrey, there are 2 questions here. I asked for your answer to the first, but if you feel like answering the second question as well, please feel free to do so. So do you have any input here?
Yeah, I agree with Sarah. I want it to be like just bring the concept that people can be who they are without it being some crazy big deal that needs to be focused on, or needs to be the center point of drama. We should eventually be a society that we're not worried about what other people are doing behind their closed doors, and just let people be who they are. I mean, we're talking about a genre in which we make up all these wild life forms and different things and multiple genders and or non-gendered, or you know what I mean, like aliens is pretty standard, but there are other examples of where that we have all this expansive possibility. Why shouldn't we have that in our stories as well, and imagine a future where that is happening and everybody's just going about their business, so seamless.
Right, seamlessness. Right. And yourself, Sean, any input on either of these 2 questions by Charlene?
I think you can get away with saying certain things or bringing up topics if it's an alien, or if you're having an animal character talk, or any, like, as long as it's an other, they can discuss issues in the open that you can't discuss as a person. Like, I don't know how else to describe that. And I know a lot of science fiction writers, they want to talk about something. Going back to Star Trek, the idea of racism or discrimination. Gene Roddenberry went on and on about that. He couldn't do that when he was writing westerns or when he was writing police dramas, but he could do it in science fiction. And I think that's why science fiction appeals to so many people, is they can discuss things that are important to them or read about it in a safe environment.
Right.
And that's what I like.
Right. And I think that actually kind of answers both of Charlene's questions at the same time. My personal take on it is that what makes science fiction so powerful is that it gives us a window into another world that's distinct from ours in at least one way. And it sort of gives us an idea of the possibilities, whether that's in a negative way or in a positive way. but it's engaging because it shows us what we don't currently have. And in the cases of, for example, in the real world, where unfortunately the LGBTQ community is not sufficiently represented, to have a world like Star Trek, where that stuff doesn't matter. For an LGBTQ audience, that's probably incredibly appealing, and it would encourage them to reflect on why isn't that the case in our world, and so on and so forth. So I think that actually answers both of our questions. So thank you. All right. Now, we are a bit over time here, so unfortunately, we won't be taking any more questions. But John, Audrey, Sarah, I'd like to thank you all very much for attending this panel and for sharing your insights and your wisdom, both as, people, but also as professionals in a way in the field, because being a writer is a profession. I stand by that. A lot of people don't seem to think of it that way. So they might think of it as a lifestyle, a hobby. But it is a profession, I would like to think, and probably one of the oldest professions in human history, if you come to think about it, if you count chroniclers as writers and storytellers. But yes, that's it for now. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to post it in the channel on Discord, and we can get around to answering those when we can. But for the moment, the live part, I think,